Hey, what's up guys, Grace here, and it's time we talked about Anthem once more. I feel like we haven't covered this game in quite some time, and you already know I like making these recaps about it once a month to keep you all updated on the current status of the game. Besides, it gives me a reason to check out the game every once in a while and take its pulse, kinda like a doctor checking on one of its comatose patients. But anyway, for those who are completely out of the loop with what's happening, the Cataclysm update is still going through its testing phase. There have been a lot of changes and improvements on the PTS, over which I'll go in just a little bit, and we should get closer to an official launch sometimes within the next couple of weeks. Many of you already know this, but the Cataclysm update was rumored to hit the live servers sometimes in July, which by the looks of it most probably will happen with the update 1.30. One of Bioware's CMs confirmed that the next content that is going to drop on both PC and the consoles will be the pre-Cataclysm event, followed by the main Cataclysm itself sometimes later, maybe like 2 weeks after that. But the current events which are on the PTS are only available for the PC users, and there are talks about bringing it to the consoles as well in the future, and a possible way to migrate our characters from the live servers to the PTS. But with that being said and done, there's some stuff we need to talk about, because part of what I've experienced still didn't make my concerns about the game go away. For starters, I will admit that the updates I've seen on the PTS are pretty damn good. There are a ton of fixes and improvements, and the Cataclysm is shaping up to be a pretty decent piece of content. There are going to be some pretty big changes to the way you gear up your javelins, and a few reworks of certain systems now that the new melee slots were introduced. But would I go as far as saying it's living up to the level of aspirational kind of content that Bioware suggested would be? It might be, but to me it sure doesn't feel that way. Sure, there's a whole lot of areas filled with events, there are more diverse objectives, and even an end boss which I found to have some really awesome mechanics, but none of that qualifies as aspirational content to me, no matter how much Bioware tries to slap that badge on it. Aspirational content, at least in my opinion, is something more akin towards raids or more sizable dungeons, or at the very least something with very well designed paths filled with obstacles that lead to boss encounters for which you really need to prepare yourself and your team, and for it to have multiple such bosses even, so that you can truly feel like you're taking one big threat for equally as big rewards. The Cataclysm event, unfortunately, even though it has its own merits, doesn't feel anything like that. At most it feels like a seasonal event that players do in between major raid releases. It's the kind of stuff that I would do back in the old days of WoW, out of boredom, so I could increase my standing with a certain faction, so then I could unlock something from its vendors. And if you look at the Cataclysm event, it's roughly following the same principles. You explore what's essentially a new map area, fight through hordes of enemies to increase that score count, and then move on to the only boss in it. And then you take all of that score back at the vendor, which ironically holds better items than the big threatening boss Bioware works so hard on to even create. There's also not much team coordination required to do this at all, but I wouldn't even know that since I never met a single soul for the better part of the past few weeks, maybe even a month. I'm basically soloing GM1 at this point, and I can't imagine Bioware getting enough feedback that they couldn't just get on their own with proper testing. Anyway, moving on, as I know loot is a major topic for everyone who's even mildly interested in this game, let's go over it and clear a few things up. I know many players have reported loot drops on the PTS feel better than what we have on the live servers, and in my time playing it, I can confirm that that is somewhat true, even though it's roughly marginal at best. Yes, you will get better chances at, say for example, legendary drops, which in part is due to the fact that the luck stat has been removed, but you're still going to battle with insane levels of RNG that affects the stats on each item. So even if you get a legendary item, it might still not be an upgrade even compared to a masterwork, because stat ranges are all over the place and higher tier items don't necessarily equate with a higher stat. You can still find a legendary item with a laughable 10% increase, for example, in a single stat, just like you can do with any other item below it. And we still have several other stats that are in many cases useless, like for example finding legendary items with pickup radius or other non-essential effects. I suspect that the reason why people are reporting better loot isn't so much because of the drop rate was increased, but rather because there's a higher concentration of enemies and rewards in a relatively condensed area. Each arena rewards a chest that appears to behave the same way as the ones in dungeons, which coincidentally require much more effort than these ones, and there are like 6 or 7 arenas in total on the Cataclysm map, which are quite easy to complete and not too far off from each other. And now we also have Vera dropping loot after you down her, so it's more of a case of getting more attempts in a short duration rather than increased chances. This brings me to the war chests, which I was really hopeful that they would change things around, but after seeing how they work, I finally got convinced that BioWare is being purposely stingy with the loot, something that up until now I attributed to their lack of experience with this type of game, but it seems that I was wrong and it was definitely not the case. To give you a quick rundown of these war chests, these can only be bought from Fort Tarsis in exchange of minor or large crystals, and there are different war chests for weapons, gear, support abilities, and so on. And it appears that these might be cycled, so one day you might find a support war chest in the shop, while the next day you might find a weapon war chest. These cost 100 minor and 1 major crystal, so they can drop either a masterwork or a legendary item for any class that is roughly 5 or 6 levels higher than any other masterwork or legendary in the game. Spoilers alert, they are still super RNG and time consuming to get, and here is why. First, you get the crystals necessary to buy these war chests by scoring in the Cataclysm event map. There is a 1 to 1000 ratio here, meaning that a score of 50,000 points in the Cataclysm map is going to equate to roughly 50 minor crystals. As a solo player, that is probably the max you can hope for the entire map, and even if you double that and say you make enough to get 100 minor crystals out of it, that is 15 minutes per, and you still need 1000 minor crystals to convert into 1 major crystal needed for one single war chest. This means that you need to spend at least 2 or 3 hours at a very efficient farming rate on GM1 for one single war chest, and again, that is because out of my own generosity I doubled those 50 crystals that you would otherwise get as a solo player. And you might be thinking, well, it doesn't sound that bad, I mean it's going to be guaranteed at least one masterwork that is higher level than my current one. Well, you would be wrong on that one as well, because war chests can drop any item from the entire item pool in that specific category that is in. So this means that you're still going to end up with a random item and never reliably be able to gear up your main javelin. Someone who opened up like 10 chests in one day even made a rough estimate, and if you're looking at a specific item that you want to get in a specific category, like for example the support category, that's a 12.5% chance, with the chance going to extreme lows for other categories that contain more items, like for example weapons and gears. And through all of this, you're still looking at either a masterwork or a legendary item, because it's not guaranteed it's going to be 100% legendary, and you're still looking at bad stats, because come on, let's be honest, the stats, they're most probably going to be bad even on legendaries. In the past, the crystals to score ratio was much more forgiving, with GM1 having a ratio of 1 to 400, which was later nerfed to 1 to 1000, which is why I said it's now being undisputable that BioWare is making the loot system bad on purpose and not out of incompetence. They found something was way too easy for people to get, so they nerfed it to the ground even on the PTS, in the hopes that this would get people to spend more time farming, which it won't. It's just going to make things even more grindy, unfun, and on the contrary, will push even more people away from the game. Now, I will say that some of this can be offset somewhat, as higher difficulties will increase score count, and running with a coordinated group of people will mean you will get much higher scores and in turn way more crystals. It could also be that these numbers will be adjusted by the time this update goes live, but let's be honest here, if BioWare changes something for the wars, they only revert it back once there's enough public outcry. But this still fails to address the 3 major problems that are still left. First, that none of this feels like aspirational type of content. Second, because there's still insane levels of RNG involved. And third of all, good luck aiming for those high scores on higher difficulties when you can barely form a party with anyone. There's barely anybody left in the game, which severely affects matchmaking on higher difficulties, and it's these higher difficulties that truly count for those high scores. I cannot imagine Anthem ever going back to its launch numbers ever again, no matter what type of comeback they might be pulling. Anyway, finally, since I was talking about content and all of that, this is still going to be way too little, way too late. Even though I feel sorry for the developers who obviously put a ton of work to make these updates, since the engine itself is really hard to work around with, the fact still remains. The first part of the update that goes live is going to be filled with pre-events, which is something that you won't spend too much time in, like more than a few hours. Even that, I mean, the pre-events are basically the free play events, which are only one type of, and well, some enemies on the map as well, but that is pretty much it. and that will last for about 2 weeks if the previous information was correct. After those supposed 2 weeks, we'll transition into the Cataclysm event, the main event, which basically means the new map and possibly the new missions if they don't already get added in the pre-event. In any case, this all together, like combined all together, is still not that much in terms of content, and given how much time BioWare needs even for something like this, of this size, soon after the Cataclysm drops, we will be back into another 1 or 2 months of silence and no updates as the company struggles to create the next piece of content. In any case, I could go over much more, but I think I got my point across. There's no good ending in sight for Anthem at the moment, at least not from what I'm able to see. I cannot imagine more than a few hundred or even 1,000 players being active at any given point. Maybe it's not such a bad idea to shut the entire game down completely and go back at the drawing board for the next like 12 months, because 4 already passed and it doesn't seem like it's going to pick off anytime soon. But this is all that I have for now. Tell me what you guys think about this. Also, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe for more if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time, so peace out.